We acknowledge that the creation of our presentation crisscrossed the globe and was composed variously on the traditional lands and waterways of
the Niantic people, oh, Maria's disappeared.
Oh, sorry. I am not in that document. Here we go. I didn't realize I was saying anything. Can you keep going? Can you keep speaking for me, Jean? I apologize.
The unceded land of the Boonwurrung and
of the Boonwurrung people. My apologies. I thought Mary was going to say all of it.
And the Windham people of the Kulin Nation and the Narragansett people. And I just want to let our friends and colleagues who have joined us know that we did have a bit of a disruption to our digital proscenium. So I was not able to log on in the end, and that is why you see me, Mary Cappello, with Jean Walton. Luckily, we share a home, and so nothing is really disrupted, except that you'll see us in the same square this evening. So my name is Mary Cappello, and I want to welcome everyone to this virtual table with Jean Walton, Melinda Harvey, Maria Tumarkin, and myself as we prepare to perform for you and to discuss the fruits of an attempt at joined composition, and with grateful acknowledgement of the partnering of Nonfiction Now and Massey University with Windham-Campbell prizes, presenting Maria Tumarkin, and with Creative New Zealand presenting myself. We need to remind everyone that this session is being recorded, and we're happy for you to post comments and questions in the chat either during our performance or, if you prefer, afterward. We'll look forward to reading and responding to comments once we've arrived at our performance's endpoint. The essay is never really a solo act. Other people are brought to life and bring life to essays. How often have you heard that said? Rather than simply rehearse this truism, we hope this experiment brings to the fore the unanticipated implications of that phrase, the essay is never really a solo act, ever open and still unfolding. Our methods were simple. In round-robin fashion, each person intervened in an essay or essay excerpt circulated by the other in whatever way she felt moved to do so. When the composition returned to its originator, it had been crossed over in various ways. What each of us did with this layered commentary is what we're sharing with you today. If the starting points and end points that the essay entertains are failure and risk, then we're in good stead. But what about the genre of the panel? With its conventionally staid form, 4 talking heads, each offering her perspective on a properly vetted topic. Could we ask for the panel to essay, to morph into a mode more in keeping with the crossings of the essay itself? And how about the effects of this encounter that we couldn't anticipate? From the emergence of the invisible or inaudible essay inside the essay, to the question of the status or presence of the voice of the other. From the allowance of multiple ways of knowing in the essay, to the incursion of joy or the subversion of tone. From the power of Cagean chance operations, to the disappearance of the author ego or author effect, the essay as an invitation to its reader to essay in turn. Our finding one another in the first place, we four, seems to have been made possible by a Nonfiction Now conference when it convened in Iceland in 2017. Jean Walton and I had already had the pleasure of getting to know the amazing mind and work of Melinda Harvey, and she said to say the pleasure was definitely all hers. When our paths crossed in Berlin, where we all happened to be residing in 2015, then Jean and I heard Maria Tumarkin's startling voice 2 years later at a Nonfiction Now conference in a pre-conference roundtable scheduled in a basement, no less. And we knew we had to introduce ourselves to her. The following day, quite unexpectedly, we crossed paths with Maria and Melinda, who already knew one another on a street in Reykjavik. And as the saying goes, the rest is history. You know, it's a good day when poetry intervenes, or even better, friendship, or even better, love. I want to claim the following 2 sentences as starting point and end point to our offering today. Quote, love is the only shocking thing left on the face of the earth. Sandra Bernhard. And what might an essay sound like that declared its love collaboratively? And so we begin. Jean Walton.
My essay revisits a discovery I had made in my 20s, when the act and indeed the time of writing seemed surprisingly intertwined with a daily bodily process. This was perhaps the original kernel of a scholarly book I ended up writing some decades later, a study of how time is stored in our enteric system and of how our bodily metabolism is connected up with larger social, economic, and political metabolic processes. With the help of my co-conspirators, I have attempted here to approach this question of what I call the dissident gut from a more intimate essayistic perspective. And my essay is titled Writing's Metabolism. Time is neither linear nor circular. It is excremental. Charles Bernstein, Me and My Pharaoh.
Time is neither fast nor slow. It is temperamental.
Among the entries in my graduate school journal was a strange narrative about an outdated calendar, one of many unfinished attempts at story writing for me in those days, self-conscious, tormented, and above all, carefully defended against criticism, the prose doubling back on itself at every turn like so much tangled intestinal footage. It was the beginning of something, or maybe a textual morsel that was to work its way through the slowest peristaltic system you could imagine, a metabolism stretched out over a lifetime, only today culminating in the crafted prose of speculative critical discourse, the product of its progress through me. Composed over a period of days sometime in 1981, this story's narrative fragments loop around the calendar multiple times, describing its design, its labeling as the 1978 friendship calendar, its situation on a wall, among other objects. The calendar is sometimes anthropomorphized, conversing with the narrator, who in turn speculates about the meaning of its existence. Is it primarily a symbol for possibilities, a series of two-dimensional boxes into which uniform units of time will be deposited day by day, or from which units of time will be subtracted?
Jean, I'm in my mind following you down an alternative track, or perhaps I should say tract, in which you become an idiosyncratic and cerebral exponent of the short story.
And what about the inner calendar? Does there even exist an inner calendar? The narrator asks, as if in answer. The calendar itself speaks in the voice of an interior monologue. When the day rolls around, the day rolls around. How do the days roll by?
This reminds me of the phenomenon of calendars that offer daily sayings. Then I want to know the difference between the saying and the essayistic aphorism.
Mary, near the kitchen telephone in the house I grew up in, there stood a big desk calendar, a day to an opening, which always, slightly inexplicably, bore an aphorism under the date. It was my first exposure to the aphorism, a form I love, which some would say is a cousin of the essay.
Tarry not if you want to be timely, says the saying. All writers, and especially essayists, are time's tamperers, says the aphorism.
Twice, the narrative is interrupted by enigmatic comments, seeming to refer self-referentially not so much to the narrator as to the writer herself. One good turd's worth, she writes, and 1,000 words later, no luck this morning.
A Russian saying, a patch of jam, a patch of shit. It's a description of life. Jam is magenta-ish, and shit is brown, naturally. And life is striped or stripy, and this is its color scheme. A saying to beat all sayings, a saying that surely speaks to every non-Russian.
At this point, the tale of the calendar ceases altogether, and a case study begins that takes as its object the peculiarities of the author of the preceding pages.
Time is neither long nor short. It is incremental.
The human organism is a fascinating thing, I begin, whether addressing the world from a first or a third person perspective. Sometimes the body and the mind arrange themselves in perfect harmony without any interference from one's conscious efforts. And other times, and here unfolds the tale of a young woman's discovery about herself. It is, of course, my own self, displaced to the status of official scientific specimen.
The essay being known to take the self as its specimen.
As an aspiring writer who is perennially unable to get down to brass tacks, the subject of the study feels trapped in a cycle whereby she desires desperately to write, yet finds it utterly impossible to put pen to paper. So acutely aware is she of the enormity of the task she wishes to perform.
How does one grant oneself the right to forestall beginnings and endings to essay?
But here's where the case study really takes off. Ever careful of her physical health, the young woman has nevertheless been bothered by irregularity. At times, her constipation becomes so severe after several days that she becomes painfully swollen and develops headaches. But at some point, she begins to notice a correlation between her writing and her toilet habits, which is to say that the more ink that flowed onto the paper, the more crap plopped.
Jean, did you all those years ago go through verb after verb so as to find the one was this onomatopoetic ring? And so did you do it as a way of not diluting what was happening to the young woman who was writing herself out of constipation?
Jean, when did the penny drop for you that there could be this correlation between ink and crap in your own life?
I wonder what we'd each come up with if we allow this formula to engender for each of us an aphorism, true or not, to our writing or our habits. Like, she begins to notice a correlation between her writing and her personal hygiene. The more unkempt she is, the neater her writing becomes. This is very hard for me to construe, a bodily habit that shares an inverse or complementary logic with a writing state or practice.
Mary, this is such an intriguing proposition, and like you, it's a challenge for me also to construe such a logic in operation in my own life. I wish I could say she begins to notice a correlation between her level of exercise / length of her hair / amount of coffee she consumes / number of dreams she has had and the quality / quantity of the writing she produces. Then there would be a way through and out.
Into the toilet. She didn't notice the correspondence at first, she says. It was only in retrospect that she realized that she was rarely bothered by constipation when she was working on the rough draft of a research paper for her university courses. She remembers jumping up from a desk littered with scribbles and notes and running, preoccupied, pencil still in hand, to the bathroom where she sat on the toilet muttering to herself cynical comments about how she was producing shit on all fronts today.
Time neither hurts nor heals. It coils round its prey, then tightens.
Jean, all of it is so finished, so perfectly expelled. I'm trying to figure out what I'm doing here because taking it apart, any kind of disassembly feels wrong. When people say, do they? There is no such thing as a completely finished piece of writing. Would you agree that they are lying through their teeth?
Or through their entrails? Where in the body does the lie lie?
She experiments with this seeming correlation, noting that when she engages in a challenging writing project each morning, she is visited by nature's call. By contrast, when a new job requires her to leave the house at an earlier hour and no writing gets done, she finds herself constipated again.
Dear Jean, a personal confession. I could never write like this, with this kind of dryness in my sentences, all the wobbliness and moisture sucked out, and each sentence standing very straight.
If it appeared that the act of writing kept her regular, it wasn't just any kind of writing that produced results, like a shopping list or a brief business note. It had to be writing that required no less than genuine literary concentration.
Is there an essay waiting to be written on this threesome with each word given its weight? Genuine literary concentration. I would love to read that, to get lost in that. What form does each of our genuine literary concentrations take?
Mary, these 3 words first conjure reading, not writing for me. Jean, I wonder what your young woman would have made of the idea that the act of the act of reading as a laxative, or could it have only contributed to her blockage?
Reading did nothing for her, or rather, for her intestines. But where composition was concerned, it seemed that 2 problems were solved at once. Writing, which had seemed previously to be a strictly intellectual activity, and which she had regarded as a career on which she would never embark because she could not get started. This writing was now functioning as a mere health measure, no more difficult for her to manage than the taking of lemon honey tea when she had a cold, or the swimming of a few pool lengths when she wanted to keep fit. It seemed that her peristaltic system, with its periodic stoppages, had come to the rescue of her blocked literary ambition by a metabolic sleight of hand, as though to say, if you won't write, then you won't shit.
Jean, the writing process's metaphorical parallels with peristalsis make so much sense.
I had personified the calendar, giving it a voice of its own, but in referring to my peristaltic discoveries in the 3rd person, I had objectified myself, no doubt in a defensive measure, not to be objectified by others.
I wonder about your youthful self-consciousness, because this is the word that we often throw over our younger selves, and it's meant to suggest something about this compulsive, gut-wrenching anticipation of being received, which weakens with age.
Maria, do you think it does? Did it for you? What makes it loosen?
What made it loosen for me was cancer and the market left behind. Until, at least, when I returned to everyday life and desires enough for it to tighten again.
It wasn't a simple question of denigrating my prose by categorizing it as shit. In fact, it was almost the reverse. I sought to dignify the daily practice of evacuation with a functionality that had previously lain hidden. Its role as a crucial element in the creative process, which I had come to regard since an early age, is the only activity worth excelling at during the course of one's short life.
Could it be a metaphorical inversion, i.e. trying to turn shit into gold?
But maybe the metaphorical is also always literal. If my first brain could not write, my second brain in the gut came to its rescue. It's sort of like what Kafka is reported to have said, I write in order to shut my eyes, meaning that it was through the act of writing that he hoped at the most literal level to cure his insomnia. In my case, it was a matter of writing to remedy another sort of bodily incapacity, the failure to loosen my bowels.
Can I see a photograph of you then, Jean?
Well, let's see.
I can't help but feel that you are a happy person, Jean.
Jean, I want to know if it's not too much of a personal confession, if this relation between writing and regularity still holds.
Yes, perhaps the present tense is called for now. In becoming my laxative.
What goes lax by way of the laxative? Is writing relax or a parallax? Is it possible both to concentrate and relax?
In becoming my laxative, in the most literal sense, writing became possible for me again.
Okay, so you, the amorphous you, I wish we could hear, see, be more together with all of you to hear your response. We've got you in the chat, but we'll keep going here. And this gives you a sense. This gives you a sense of what we're trying. So here I am now with my my collaborated piece, And just my piece is called Situation Rooms. And I just want to say that it began as a very long and unwieldy and, dare I say, I think failed essay in the end, in which I was trying to write about this funny phrase, situation rooms, in an attempt to arrive at the place of situation comedies in my American upbringing, and occasioned by, as an adult, being unexpectedly seated across a dinner table in Berlin. I was seated across from probably the greatest creator of situation comedies in the United States. And in a sense, then, he who made me, I really felt like I was meeting God, because I had watched so many of his situation comedies, Norman Lear. So that was the original essay from which I culled 5 or 10 pages for my collaborators to treat, having brought to the surface the occurrence of obfuscating, falsifying, or occult technologies in the original, as well as the prevalence of communication technologies, and not least a poem. My readers gifted me the nascent essay that was wholly apparent to them, but really invisible to me. So a polyphonic excerpt, a short polyphonic excerpt of that newly born piece, Situation Rooms. In the 1970s, my parents bought one of those reel-to-reel tape recorders.
Tape recorder, magnetic tape, circles, re-recording ease, portable, sound as if live, World War II. Allies noticed certain German officials were making radio broadcasts from multiple time zones simultaneously.
And we used to carry out mock interviews on it, home movies.
Home movie, sometimes vision only, with the clicking of the shutter audible, which ages the footage instantaneously. Home movie maker parallels Nick Carraway, knows everything, but isn't really a participant. Zapruder.
Were more predictable in the ways that they thematize domestic space, but the introduction of the reel-to-reel into the era's domiciles seems to have been about making the nuclear family into journalists, imitation newscasters, or maybe even Watergate wannabes.
Watergate. Potential crossword puzzle answers for Watergate subterfuge are cover up, cat and mouse, plots, ruse, slyly, chicanery, trap, while, pretext.
My father would hold a microphone to my face, his eyes trained on the hair-like needles that marked the volume and half resembled the praying mantis legs.
Praying mantis. Praying mantises are very cryptic animals that go to great lengths to remain hidden from both predators and prey. They're capable of hiding because their camouflage coloration, sedentary behavior, and the rocking motions employed when they do have to move.
Legs of a lie detector test.
Lie detector, sweat, breath, pulse, non-visible, non-verbal signs. Crime, polygraph where we otherwise use torture. You can lie to the lie detector if you know how. Bogus pipeline.
When he'd ask, "What do you think of the world situation?" I always gave him the same answer. "I think there should be less war." My arms folded across the peace sign that was printed onto my oversized sweatshirt.
Oversized sweatshirt. A common disguise technique is to wear clothing a size too large to make it appear that the wearer is smaller than one would expect.
Well, my mother asked us questions about ourselves, our likes and dislikes, our current preoccupations and desires. My father asked generic big picture questions, his other favorite being, "Do you think there's life on other planets?" Today's headlines, 40 years forward of these scenarios, rely on the same unself-conscious contradiction, as if to say the world is fucked, and since we fucked it up, let's set our sights on worlds elsewhere. Pick up any copy of the New York Times.
Newspaper, once thrown from a barrow or car, print on one's fingers. Pages too big to read next to somebody on crowded public transport.
On any day of this year, and you'll find more and more headlines as proof positive of the precariousness of the world situation, punctuated by reports on the viability of Mars as a place that could sustain human life, or the discovery of a new solar system, or the quest for other life forms. Of course, the ultimate situation room is the one buried in the bowels of the White House, not, as myth would have it, in a bunker located deep underground, but in the basement of the building's west wing. It is immune to attack, with its top secret telephones and glass fogging devices, with its whisper walls.
Whisper walls, upholstered walls designed to absorb acoustics and prevent sound from reverberating in a room, not to be confused with whispering walls or the whispering bench in Philadelphia, where a person sitting at one end of the bench can turn and whisper into the wall behind him. A second person sitting at the opposite end can clearly hear what is being said.
And knowledge walls. It's the stuff of Get Smart. One of the most viewed images on Flickr is a famous Situation Room photo in which Barack Obama and his team, including Secretary of State Hillary Clinton and Vice President Joe Biden, watch on a screen beyond our view the situation of the capture of Osama bin Laden. It's a lot like 19th century American Thomas Aiken's painting of the Gross Clinic, with its variously arrayed postures of male authority, punctuated by the lone cry of a visibly emotive female, where the woman in the dissecting room painting covers her eyes. The woman in the Situation Room photo, Hillary Clinton, covers her mouth.
Covers her mouth. A body language manual tells us the hand covers the mouth as the brain subconsciously instructs it to try to suppress the deceitful or, in other cases, unintended words that are being said.
We watch them watch. We chart their reactions to what they're watching on TV.
Television, the screen we shared daily before we all got our own ones. Black and white, then color, broadcasting into our homes, into bedrooms, and during dinner time. Once the size of a pillow, now the size and width of a wall. Choice limits, now almost only reality TV.
Now, of course, the beautiful room is empty. Quote, the Situation Room exceeds the purview even of reality TV. It's no longer locatable. It is everywhere and nowhere. It is, according to a headline on Valentine's Day 2017, a problem and a question of how Mar-a-Lago became the Situation Room. These days, my imagination tends toward scenarios, but it wasn't always so. My imagination always seems to have been stoked on the overvaluation of isolated details rather than on narrative, which might be the defining difference between poetry and fiction, between obsessive compulsive disorders and depression, between the essay.
What kind of communication technology is it?
And the novel, or between situation comedies and TV serials. Rather than latch onto my sitcom's theme songs for their comforting familiarity, I used to like to wonder who the musicians were who performed the music and where. Often I pictured them crowded into a vestibule where they feasted on cucumber sandwiches and other bland foods accompanied by martinis. The years when Norman Lear crossed our domestic threshold were my preteen heading into teen years, the signal period of a burgeoning eros, which I associate not with first kisses or first crushes, though those were occurring, to be sure, but with various defamiliarizing.
Defamiliarization, or ostranenie, is the artistic technique of presenting to audiences common things in an unfamiliar or strange way in order to prevent the over-automatization of perception, which causes an individual to function as though by formula.
And mismatched momentary flashes. The first glimpse of a fish out of water, its gasping gill and hook, its desperate flopping on the nearby creek's shore. Parsley growing from a dented pasta pot, tulips like paddles plashing red. All of this experience through a lens of the relative absence or presence of money. The realization that a sock is functional with or without a hole. You haven't fallen into the slough of despond yet. Your father's t-shirt holes are a sign of life. Either Norman Lear's sitcoms confirm this, or such holiness is the lambent aperture through which you watch his shows. Crowded onto one couch in the living room, or maybe I'm sitting on the floor near to my father's knee. I'm aware that my father smelled of a combination of parchment paper, yellowed, a burnt griddle, and cedar. He smelled of something archival.
Archive consigns memory to extinction. Death drive.
But that's not right at all. To be more exacting, he smelled like the newspaper.
Newspaper. Dostoevsky's love of their formal juxtaposition. Quote, for God's sake, read them. And this is not to be fashionable, but so that the visible connection between all things public and private might be stronger and more obvious, unquote.
Poems of M. Cappello, Mary's words only, unaltered. 1. I think there should be less war. Crowded onto one couch in the living room, my father would hold a microphone to my face. What do you think of the world situation? I always gave him the same answer. Crowded onto one couch in the living room, or maybe on a screen beyond our view, or maybe in a vestibule, in a bunker located underground, my father would hold a microphone. Everywhere, nowhere in real time, as if to say the world is fucked, his eyes trained on the horizon, arms folded. Do you think there is life on other planets? I always gave him the same answer. 2. A state of national emergency, some unexpected and furtive festivity, something archival. I am trapped in my Prius. I'm not ashamed of this. One morning upon waking, on any day of this year, 40 years forward of these scenarios, I'm trapped in my Prius, immune to attack, proof positive of other life forms. 3. We watch them watch, those we love and with whom we will flee, as though there were satellites that are beyond reach. Wannabes.
Melinda.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mary. Instead of introducing the next piece, which we've entitled Condition Report, by telling you something about the original essay that I distributed to my accomplices, or indeed to its transformation by them, I offer you now, I hope, if I can do this, some photographs of our childhood homes in 4 different parts of the globe: Surrey, British Columbia; Derby, Pennsylvania; Kharkiv, USSR; and Sydney, Australia. So we'll see if this works. Oh, no, wrong share. I'm sorry, everyone. Present. I hope you can see that.
Yes.
I'll just leave it there for a second and then we'll begin. Condition report. I fly QF 430 to Sydney with my daughter to help my parents pack up the family house. My husband has been left back in Melbourne to deal with the unopened cardboard boxes strewn across the floors of our new rental. The condition report is in my carry-on for signing and sending.
A report that you fill out and send back to the movers to detail the condition you find your belongings in after they have moved them to your new dwelling. But this essay is a condition report, perhaps attesting to the condition we find ourselves in upon moving after many years from one place to another, whether that means away from the family home or away from your adult home upon retirement. Life is a series of condition reports.
I'm visualizing ticks for things more or less in order, and squished handwritten notes in a juicy blue pen for scuffs, cracks, and missing tiles, the kinds of things we worry will get pinned on us unless we claim them as predating us. I'm thinking of a need to say, it was here before we got here.
I can't remember when I first lied about where I came from, but I've lied often enough to have lost track of who I've told. Hurstville, I've said, Penshurst or Rockdale less frequently. Once my sister married and moved to the other side of the Tom Uglies Bridge, I felt I had permission to venture the Shire and the southern suburbs. Seldom Beverly Hills.
Roughly 15 years ago, I lived in Sydney's King's Cross, Sydney's notorious seedy red light district. I lived on Keller Street, which had more brothels proportionately than any other street in the hood. The area was referred to as Potts Point. I referred to it as Potts Point too when it suited me, but also as King's Cross when I wanted to be a little shocking. I was living in my tiny, cockroach-infested one-bedroom flat with a child who was 6. It was not a place to raise a child. And an Iranian doctor I met through a dating website was shocked by my location. I said Potts Point to him at first, but then King's Cross again and again when his squeamishness and concern for Billy, child, began to annoy me. He found a nice Iranian doctor, female, and they happily something.
Perhaps to essay is perpetually to lie about where we come from, or to begin elsewhere, to insist on beginning elsewhere, to remake points of origin, to preempt the need for arrivals.
Beverly Hills was originally called Dumbleton, named after a local orchard that had been planted once the land, quote, nothing but a profusion of wattle and gum trees and native scrubs, the breeding ground for kangaroos and wallabies, unquote, was cleared in the early 1800s. This nothing, that was also a profusion, was presumably called something by the Bidjigal people who inhabited it before the arrival of Europeans. But the manila folder Julie will set aside for me at the Hurstville branch of the Georges River Library doesn't contain any information about that. There is plenty in the folder about the name change to Beverly Hills, however. It occurred in November 1940, when the residents decided Dumbleton was, quote, very depreciating and did not enhance the prestige of the area, end quote. Its residents preferred for the area to conjure movie stars, mansions, swimming pools, glamour, money. This dreaming was not confined to the 1940s. I was a teenager when the enormous palm trees planted by cranes were put in along the median strip of King George's Road.
While I lived in Western Canada, in an A-frame on the King George Highway, I played in Kwantlen Park. But in those days, my friends and I knew nothing of the Kwantlen people. Today, though I live across the continent and south of the border, I can visit their website, learn about their culture, listen to pronunciation guides for words in their language, Hunkaminam. Now, if I were to attend a public event in my old hometown, the host would acknowledge that we are gathered on the unceded territory of the Kwantlen First Nation. George was never king of the Kwantlen people.
I was born in Darby, Pennsylvania, on the outskirts of Philadelphia. It was a solidly working class town wherein lay pockets of dire poverty as well. I think I grew up with a skewed sense of class, not upper, middle, lower, but working class and poverty class. I thought we didn't have much or that we had nothing, but there would always be someone at school who had less. The boy whose family couldn't afford a newspaper, she whose family had no phone, or worse, no food.
We were all used to moving in my family, an average of once every year and a half before we crossed the border into Canada. I still have the single typewritten sheet of paper with all our worldly belongings on it for presentation to the immigration office. An improbably small list, and yet every house we had lived in seemed, to my child's eyes, so full of our stuff. Now, how strange it is that I've lived in my present house for over 20 years, 17 years longer than we stayed in any one of my childhood houses.
My mother hasn't got a clue how to move house, unlike me, whose worldly possessions have been chosen with half a mind to fitting them at short notice into the boot of a car. My sister and I tip the contents of drawers onto our old beds and exhume wedding presents never used from the backs of cupboards. Nobody gets emotional about notches carved in the door frame because there are none. I take photos of the house surreptitiously, a hall light fitting, the lounge room curtains, the pebble-shaped tiles on the front veranda.
The disposition of things left in drawers, of determining how to be in relation to a house and its cubbies, of combination memory and the unspoken, is making me think of a particular cubby in the basement at Concord Road. It was a storage space my father created beneath a set of stairs. It was a very simple triangular door that my father had cut and hinged to create an enclosure. But I experienced it as a child as an engineering feat of phenomenal proportion. When someone would open it to retrieve the Xmas ornaments each year, I would re-experience its promise, even though stowed deep inside me was a sense of its discomforting haunt.
When we left the former Soviet Union, my parents had to fit all of our life as a family into 15 identical suitcases. I was appalled by what they had packed. I thought we were intellectuals.
What is the conundrum then? That the house was not the material space in which a family could be found, what did my family make its own, given all the houses we moved in and out of?
I feel like in quote unquote advanced democracies, doors and walls of houses are no longer trusted with documenting children's growth. It's a hunch. I don't have proof. Also, the word carve feels curious. To carve alive. What was meant by that? How is life carving different to, say, life making? If a family home is not, quote, the material space in which a family could be found, end of quote, where could such space be?
The garage was the house's attic, except that it contained not a whole family's collective unconscious, but things belonging exclusively to my mother. Cupboards that once hung in the kitchen and had been stuck to its 3 brick walls. Large plastic tubs were stacked beneath them. My mother's 46 years as a teacher are in these cupboards and tubs. The life she led without us, her best self. Marbig desk calendars, the sign on her office door, a cassette tape of recorder music, thank you cards from Sarah and Jason, now covered with cockroach shit. They had meant something. They had not been looked at since. In the bedroom that was once mine, but is now where my mother plays card games on an old PC and my father goes to listen to talkback radio, I find a box. It contains my scapular, missal, catechism, holy cards, wooden crucifix with a plastic Jesus, and glow in the dark statue of the Virgin Mary. Quote, the one class you do not belong to and are not proud of at all is the lower middle classes, end quote, writes Helen Chappell. Did I throw myself into Catholicism as a child because it gave me a culture I could live with? I don't want these objects, but something like a fear of celestial reprisal prevents me from throwing them away. There must be a right way to dispose of such objects, like there's a right way to dispose of a family pet or radioactive material.
And where is my family's collective unconscious? Dispersed among the 3 households of my 2 siblings and myself in odd pieces of furniture, photos or scrapbooks we had inherited from our parents, a piano, but that's gone now, a dusty rug that we hooked as a family during the Boulder, Colorado years.
What can be identified as any family's dream spaces? In my family, it was their gardens.
And when you don't have children, you wonder, who's going to do the disposing of your trinkets and papers and books and notes and old calendars and defunct phones, not to mention the boxes of unknowables in the basement to which I've become indifferent, but which I can't seem to unload? Is this essay really about the immortality of our things in the face of our own mortality?
And we're going to move to the final piece, collaborative polyphonic piece. Not much to say, let's just get started.
I look for signs, but of what? What is the object of my reading? Is it, am I loved? Am I loved no longer? Am I still loved? Roland Barthes, A Lover's Discourse.
We are the family who says, I love you a lot. My oldest son, from the warm toilet seat to whoever is in the hearing zone. My daughter shouting from her bed. She has been sick for years and mainly bed stuck. Sometimes I say to her, and then regret it straight away, your I love you mom sounds like fuck off. We scream it onto Kooyong Road when one of us is walking out. That's how conversations often begin.
Love is the only shocking thing left on the face of the earth. Sandra Bernhard.
Melinda tells me later, in person, how much of a turn-off she finds the first sentence. Because, she says, it looks like it will be an essay about one of those families. What? In my head, the first sentence declares, this is an essay about a problem. The author's family has a problem. Why else would they be saying, I love you all the time? They're covering up some lack, some wounds. It's ridiculous, this over-declaring, a symptom.
Sing or fall silent, open, close.
Melinda says that the second sentence about a son from a toilet seat signals to her that it's okay to read on. Then by the end of sentence number 3, in which the daughter is bed-stuck, the author's assumed triumphalism seems in tatters. This family is a train wreck. My surprise at Melinda's reaction to the opening line, don't we, in the beginning, before any trickles and surges of language, stand there in silence in some shared pre-reading, pre-feeling space, the reader and the writer, figuring each other out. We're the family who says I love you a lot. My husband, we're not married, and I say it to each other in our sleep. Never one time, many times, all the time.
Coupledom creates its own mantras. My friend Mary says that she and her lover Jean, they are married for a long while, repeated as well in their sleep. Is everything going to be okay? Until Mary got cancer, at which point they stopped.
Mother, how long have you been on your iPad? Son, dreamily, I love you.
Mary, at the breakfast table, suddenly over cornflakes. Jean, I love you. Jean never takes it well, but only with suspicion. Why now? What aren't you saying? Which is a little more generous than what she used to say in their doughy-eyed youth, when Mary would cloud any situation with the phrase. Jean would ask, what does that even mean?
I stand with Jean. The love declaration always wears a cloak.
What does it do, this declaration, which is, which must be, about something else? I tell my husband, we're not married, about this essay. He says, do you think we will stop saying it now? We put ourselves on notice, but nothing changes. We say it when we're awake and when we're asleep. Poetry makes nothing happen. That's Auden, right? Quoting Auden when talking about poetry, is it like quoting Kafka when talking about totalitarianism, Barthes on love, Montaigne on essays?
I've often considered that essays at their best are anti-declarative, but that isn't entirely true. The declarative being all voice can have the effect of canceling voice altogether. The clar of declarative must be the same as in clarion, but not as in clear, more like as in aired. If all essays are at base love letters one was not able to send, the recipient could not hear it, the recipient does not exist, then essayists are ever at odds with the need for declaration.
I like this idea. The essay as an unsendable letter, but need it only speak of love?
What does it do, this declaration, which is, which must be, about something else? Is it like turning taps on or sending a cat into the house first?
Is it like making sure your shoes, when they're missing your body, dropped onto some floor, point in the same direction?
Or is it like putting an umbrella in your bag every day of the week without paying heed to the forecast? But is there anything wrong with wanting to stay dry?
Sometimes when we all say it to each other in a quick succession, we just keep going as if on a loop. Are we defrosting ourselves continuously like those upmarket fridges?
Or are you an echoing echo bouncing off the surfaces of a cave? But even echoes come back transformed.
Or maybe it's more like clapping 3 times, the way I would in the narrow toilet of my childhood, to allow cockroaches to disperse. Lights on, 3 claps, then enter and descend. Or the modestly proportioned, unassuming cockroaches of my childhood. If only you could see your meaty Australian cousins with their fancy cockroach wings.
Bad luck comes in 3s, an English idiom. Perhaps it doesn't count. I want to hear more about this clapping girl in the narrow toilet with the cockroaches. But this is an essay about love. But every child has something to say on the matter.
Mary, getting back to her again, had this very odd habit in childhood of saying to her mother several sentences as though in one word, a seal that she couldn't not produce if she were going to be able to seal her eyes in sleep. She said it to her mother every night for years. I love you, God bless you, you're a good cook. It's hard to believe she grew up to be a feminist, and her mother a feminist too, both of them eventually atheists.
I was born into a family where most I love yous were rarely said in earnest. They'd be touched with irony or wrapped in a quote, bouncing in an illusory bubble from the dispenser to the recipient. If you come from a non-English speaking immigrant family where language, first, second, third, is not trusted with what is innermost, if it is there and real, it doesn't need to be said. You'll know what I'm talking about has very little, possibly totally nothing to do with some kind of repression. Much of the world comes from a family like mine.
Now, this is more familiar terrain for me. But irony doesn't stop a love declaration being one. Umberto Eco tells the story of a man who loves a very cultivated woman and knows that he cannot say to her, "I love you madly," because he knows that she knows, and that she knows he knows, that these words have already been written by Barbara Cartland. But there is a way out, according to Eco. The man can still say, as Barbara Cartland would put it, "I love you madly." This way, the man avoids what he calls false innocence and has said what he wanted to say to the woman, that he loves her in an age of lost innocence. If the woman goes along with this, Eco continues, both will have succeeded once again in speaking the language of love.
Dad says I'm missing the point. The thing is that "I love you" in Russian means 1,000 times what it means in English. That's why. In English, "I love you" is often like checking all is okay, says Mom. Really, does it mean less in English? Huff and puff here thinking. And if it does, is it because English doesn't belong to us, its certifiably non-native speakers, or because it is English, the language of the Anglophone West with its abundance of resources, language included? So much stuff that you can safely throw it around, no problem.
If I speak in the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. I was recently put back in touch with the poetry of Corinthians 13, which has been quoted so much. It's become rather hallmarkish. But for this instance, did it have to do with my mood or my hearing? It really was as if I was hearing it in all its gorgeousness for the first time. Then I learned that though this passage is oft quoted at 20th century wedding ceremonies in the Anglophone West, like much of what Anglophone Westerners appropriate, it's misunderstood, because the love that Paul was referencing was agape, not wedding bell love or love with its requisite proscenium, but what I would describe as love without an object.
But if over-declaring is akin to over-consuming, what to do with all those resource-rich native speaker families in which "I love yous" are simply not said?
Not saying "I love you" touches me more than saying it a lot.
You said it once, I believed you. You said it twice, I began to doubt your words. You said it 3 times, and I knew you were lying. I wonder if this saying, so prominent in my childhood, at the time I was working out how to listen and speak, makes sense in English. And if there is a folkloric prohibition on repetition, always take this seriously, surely it must be particularly strict in matters of love being declaimed. So, my family,
Claim, clamor, climb, reclamation, declamation, chime.
Could this essay be called "On Declaring, Also on Repetition"?
Yes.
I'm very bad at titles. My father says I'm bad at endings too. Maria Golubkina, the daughter of 2 famous Soviet actors, Andrei Mironov and Larisa Golubkina, a great actor in her right, says on a TV show, "Mom, I publicly declare to you here now that yes, I love you. Can we let it be, please?" No one speaks like this on Russian language television. There's more to be said about Golubkina, who I adore. But for now, I want to know why the family I created is created arrogant.
No.
In my second language, puts its trust in declarations, even if what we're declaring is not the transcendental kind of love.
I wish you would say more about Maria Golubkina. She says she adores her. That's love plus something grander, in my opinion. Respect.
I once had an Anglo friend who would always declare what was happening with her, the worst thing in her life at any given point, like miscarriage. She would say to shop assistants, they'd ask her about her day, "How has your week been so far?" You know, the bullshit question, not their fault, you know that too, right? They're told to ask it by their enlightened managers. And my friend from once upon a time would say, "Well, I've had a miscarriage." It didn't matter to her what they said back. She was not after their pity. She was not offended by their indifference. She did not want a conversation, God forbid. All that mattered to her was to say it, the most painful thing. I kind of loved it about her, loved it a lot. It's this kind of declaring that appears to ask for nothing back, as it insists on speaking of what hurts the most, the opposite of an essay in all of its anti-declarative side entrances and narrow alleys glory, or not at all.
Don't we show we love someone by telling them, only them, the most painful thing? Telling it true is the real currency of love. But what if we weren't hoarded? What if it weren't hoarded by couples and best friends, but spread around?
Which brings me back to Sandra Bernhard, the stand-up essayist who everyone has forgotten. She had her 5 minutes of stardom, but has been for the most part remembered by cult followers who visit her shows in small clubs now, queer fans all. She interleaves music, sometimes purposely off-key, understated political commentary, reportage, and memoir, interleaves this with a dose of self-deprecation and wraps these subtly autonomous yet deftly woven moments, salty and deadpan by turns, in a wholly uncommon to American audiences irony. She's had a facelift, but purposely performs a kind of declarative ugly. When she's least ironic, she can also be unstintingly antidotal in a darkly vituperative age.
Pre-pandemic, I showed my students Sarah Polley's documentary, Stories We Tell. When I turned the lights back on at the end of the movie, my eyes did not look professional.
Perhaps weeping is too crude. Perhaps we must not refer all tears to one and the same signification. Perhaps within the same lover, there are several subjects who engage in neighboring but different modes of weeping. Which is that I who has tears in my eyes, Bart, A Lover's Discourse.
I noticed some students couldn't just pop out of their seats. This was satisfying. You want them heavy-limbed after films that leave you with tears everyone can see, after declarations.
Who will write the history of tears? In which societies, in which periods have we wept? Bart, A Lover's Discourse. Mary tells me that she sometimes tells her students that she loves them. En masse, not one at a time in a creepy boundary-defiling way in her office. When she says it, she feels as disarmed by the statement as they. She does this performatively when she wants to make a point about an ethics of care, that the sectioning off of love as property and right we all, quote, belong to someone, or in the eyes of the law do not exist, cancels love in its most significant and necessary form, the way of fundamental regard, mano a mano, human to human. Then she tells me about the candlelight by which she reads her students' writing. It feels like that. She tends to it for so long, each beaded moment to beaded moment, bathed in a kind of love, a kind of care, even if one often feels love's labor lost. Her favorite passage in this Bart she keeps quoting reads, "The perfect interlocutor, the friend, is he not the one who constructs around you the greatest possible resonance? Cannot friendship be defined as a space with total sonority?" What might an essay sound like that declared its love collaboratively?
My friend Jean writes me a ghazal. I don't know what a ghazal is. I'm mispronouncing it terribly, by the way, although I can see that it is a pattern-following poetic text. I look up the definition. Ghazal, in Middle Eastern and Indian literature and music, a lyric poem with a fixed number of verses and a repeated rhyme, typically on the theme of love, and normally set to music. Jean's ghazal goes like this.
The family knows just how to say, I love you, and each her role when it's time to say, I love you. One child conveys such warmth from the toilet seat, calls out to mom with pride to say, I love you, or languishing on the tedious pillowcase, a head turns slowly round to say, I love you. Two sleep and toss and breathe all night together. Synchronized in dreams, they say, I love you. In a family past, in a different land before, irony sheathed the way one said, I love you. One Russian word for 100 English platitudes was enough to say, I love you. Or another family keeps counsel with itself as though to say is to Unsay, I love you.
The effect of gene processing my words through a lyrical tradition as formally delineated and disciplined as this is comedic. I see that my writing feels as if I'm trying to look at a loose eyelash with the eye it's been irritating.
Will all these repetitious declarations assure one knows that every day they love you? Can a sly, immodest, winged cockroach fly anywhere near when someone dares to love you? Do unprofessional eyes or folkloric laws or televisual cries relay, I love you? This gene believes that once you are beloved, no declaration, flawed or pure, may unlove you.
Okay.
And that's it.
That's it. Here we are with 15 minutes to spare, happily.
Yes, for
yeah.
comments.
Okay, so thank you all for being with us as we brought this experiment forward in virtual land. And as we said at the outset, we hope that you would share your comments and questions as it was unfolding. And we will now take a look. And we have no plan in terms of who will jump in here. We're going to see what we see, and whoever wishes from among us to pick up one of the threads you're sending out to us shall. So just give us a moment.
Roz Bellamy asks, this is so wonderful to listen to. Is there a written version we can read while they are performing?
Sorry about that, Roz.
Lovely comments from people. Clap, clap, clap. Yeah, I felt like I wanted there to be a kind of soundtrack to turn on at the end of each paper, right? So that there's the sound of an audience clapping. And then I realized the clapping are these hands.
We actually did have a series of photos to close with that we forgot
Yeah.
about. So maybe we'll do that too.
I'll go forward to see if
to
there's
bring
actually
things home.
questions.
Because
So there are a couple of questions
Yeah,
that
go
popping
ahead.
up toward the end here. So Ruth Fogarty has asked a question. How well did we all know one another before working together? I guess Mary outlined a little bit of that at the beginning of the presentation. I met Mary and Jean in Berlin in 2015. I went to hear Mary present a lecture. And those of you who've had the privilege of hearing Mary lecture will know, or just from your own selves, what kind of experience that is, an overwhelming experience, so overwhelming that I had to go up and talk to her, which is not something that I do routinely. And in fact, I found out that Mary would be speaking at another event, I think maybe the next day, on the same topic, and I went to that lecture. So I went to the lecture twice, and we've been in touch ever since. Maria, I'll let you narrate how we know each other and how you know Mary and Jean.
Melinda, how do we know each other? Yes. So, but that's it's a bit personal. How much can I say, Melinda? Can we collaborate in the telling of this bit? Just to say that if I remember this correctly, Melinda, I wrote something years and years ago. I wrote an essay about the afterlife of books and the way that the books, various books kind of live on in the world, and they become a sort of just kind of ways for people to survive, to stay sane, to stay connected to others, and they kind of transcend the literary shapes and the literary purposes. And so forth. It was a kind of, now I'd probably be cringing, deeply in reading that essay. Anyway, it was just like, it was a love letter to books. And then I read an interview with Melinda, where Melinda, is that right, Melinda, without referring explicitly, and perhaps, I don't know if you read it or not, you just completely just pulled it apart, this whole idea that at times, at kind of catastrophic times, personal or shared collective catastrophic times, books will save us. And this whole savior narrative, around books was just dismantled by Melinda. And I needed to find Melinda and speak to her. And so I connected with Melinda through a person we had in common, and we set up coffee. Is that right? Is that right? Have I lied? No.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, absolutely. And yes, disagreeing with Maria is like a red rag to a bull, but in a good way. I think what I didn't know was I was actually, singing a siren song. Because she's very attracted to ideas that are different from her own.
I think I would only add to this conversation that we were each not at home when we met. I think the four of us, and I think that's worth noting. In one case in Berlin, another case in Iceland. Secondly, that what it means to meet at a conference like Nonfiction Now is very special. And Jean and I were commenting today how, if we were at the conference, we'd be beforehand, before the keynote, before this panel, we'd be talking with people. We'd be already in the mode and mood and the energy of it. We'd be sharing and we'd be conversing and passing things between us. And instead, we're wandering around our house like zombies, awaiting the moment. I really think that's important to acknowledge. And third, that I think we all know each other in a kind of essential way through each other's writing.
Yes.
And so I think in some ways, maybe the work we've done together is a testament to the love that can emerge as readers, of one another. We really don't know one another real well in a normative sense of that, is what I'm trying to say. We haven't known one another for a long time, but we know one another intensely, I feel. So I hope that helps to address the question. Lots of questions, and we've got about 5-6 minutes.
So Jessie Boylan asked, can you tell us a little about your process working each piece? And I think that some people who were in Malta at a conference on the essay a few years ago may have heard us deliver this same piece there. And since that time, it's actually been reworked a little bit more. I felt for my piece, in any case, that I hadn't worked it enough and in response enough to the comments that had been interlarded in my writing. And so I did some more work on it in order to make it more responsive to your responses. But originally, we sent each finished or begun piece around to each other, and it sort of went in a kind of round robin of landing into emails. And then one of us would work on another person's piece, and then it would go on to the next person until it had 3 sets of interventions. And then we rewrote it for Malta. And I have a file on my computer that's called the Malta Spiral. And that's because I think of it as the spiral that we kept spiraling through. And then we reworked it some more for this conference.
And perhaps it bears noting that we originally conceived and carried out this collaboration pre-pandemic, of course. Yes. And so I think when we came back to it for the purposes of Nonfiction Now, I know one thing that occurred to me was whether my piece was still, in a sense, relevant. And I decided that it was. And I think a lot of things that we can look at pre-pandemic take on a different sort of resonance. It figures differently, but it still seems to speak to some of the things, obviously, that are most pertinent.
Yeah, I would just add to that we intervened differently on each of the original pieces. So in the case of Condition Report, what each of the members of the Spiral did to my piece, which was originally called Beverly Hills, was add endnotes. And it occurred to me when I got my documents, the endnotes, well, first it was obvious the endnotes were longer than the original essay, and in fact made a coherent whole. I could have cut the endnotes into a document and they would have been the essay, another essay completely. And in fact, that was what I, originally did. I excised all of my essay and only included endnote comments from Mary, Jean, and Maria. And what I liked about that idea was that, the essay was in my readers. The original essay was in my readers, and their response to it, I like to think of as still having its trace in their responses.
Yeah, and I would just add something else, and that may sound maybe a little presumptuous on my part, but one of the joys for me in sort of working on the love essay with the members of the spiral, as Melinda called us, is actually like I felt that that somehow this piece, I loved that sensation of the ownership of that piece slipping out of my hands. It honestly did not feel like it's my piece where, my collaborators just left their traces and, ran through my piece as cockroaches, and kind of droppings. And I just had to go back to one of the themes of this panel, right? Shit. But it actually felt entirely like I couldn't refer to it as, my piece on love or whatever. And I loved not owning it. I love that, for instance, I think it provoked in Mary what felt to me like the strongest her writing in that piece felt to me even stronger than her writing in supposedly her piece. And I loved it, right? And so not to own it and not to invite voices in, but to be taken over by the voices of others and to concede and to surrender to them and then to marvel at them, that is a beautiful act of, crossing over, right? And not a kind of just simply, come into my house and rearrange the furniture, but it's still my house. Now I'm referring to your piece, Melinda. I'm just trying to use those, But yeah. So that to me was like a very powerful and beautiful part of this experience. So there is a question from Becky about the seed concept of the collaboration, which I'm sort of thinking, do we have enough time to respond to?
Well, I think it was the idea of crossing over and what an essay crosses. Abysses, for example, different forms of knowledge, but also what it would mean to cross over into one's work. But I think that you so eloquently already addressed, Maria. I mean, what happened in the process if we give ourselves over to the voices of others? It's not simply about populating your piece with the voices of others. There's a surrender that happens. And I would say that I find most moving, in fact, the way in which by the end, in the love essay, Maria has actually interwoven so many of the elements of the other pieces. And so it's an extraordinary and loving act of having listened and having heard what we were each doing toward the creation of an entirely new piece that's all of a piece, it seems to me, with all of the others. I don't know about the pieces standing alone. It feels to me like they are one body and that they are meant in this sense also to be delivered and heard in sequence in the way that we delivered them, I think. We have 2 minutes left and I'm told that things totally cut off.
They do?
Well, yes, at 6:45, it just, woo! Again, different from being together where we would mingle and keep going. You could, if you have a moment, that would be a nice way to close, I think, Jean.
Can I just say
Absolutely.
that it's also funny.
Well, I'm sharing.
It's also very funny, and I think often we may get a little bit serious about the idea of collaboration, but I think that you've got this, but I think it was just I had to really control myself not to laugh all over this panel today, not to spray my laughter everywhere, because I think it's to to cross over in this way is hilarious as well.
Yeah, and I think that brings us back to the incursion of joy and the disruption of tone that I think of as really a political act as well. It's 6:45. I think it just stopped. I think things just stop now, right?
Thank you to our audience for, I mean, these things can be very cold, but I have felt a lot of warmth, and
Yes.
and I have felt your presence here, and I think you helped us present today, and so thank you. And I'm sorry that we can't be, I don't know, being blown around by Wellington winds today, but yes, look forward to hearing you all speak, and also being in the room with you, listening.
Thank you all.
Ditto.
for
Thank
coming.
you
Thank
all.
you very much. Thank you.
With love.
Sorry, this week.